What? Rowan's getting married? It was a sudden announcement. The talk of the town is that our step-grandchild is getting hitched. But the real shocker was what my son and his wife said next. From now on, we want to live just as a family. So, the maid we no longer need, you can leave. They probably think I'm floored by this. At last, 15 years of living together was worth it, I sighed. Just then, someone appeared behind me. My name is Charlotte, a 57-year-old housewife. I married my husband Anthony 37 years ago when I was 20. Back then, I just started working after graduating from beauty school. But life had other plans. I got pregnant, so we got married. I had wanted to work longer and didn't expect to marry so soon. I sometimes wondered how this happened. I had my doubts, but Anthony promised, "I will make sure you and our child are happy." Believing him, I committed to spend my life with him. And Anthony kept his promise. He always took great care of me. He was attentive during my pregnancy and even took the lead in household chores. Then I gave birth to our first son, John. Anthony was wonderful with him too. "John, let's go play catch." Yay! We could often go to the park on weekends. I would tag along and watch them play, feeling content. Anthony worked hard during the week and made family time on weekends. So, when John was young, I didn't need to work. When he started elementary school, I began working part-time. I contributed the money to his future tuition and our savings. We lived comfortably without financial worries. John grew quickly and advanced through middle and high school. From the outside, we were a picture-perfect family, and I felt very happy. But every family has its worries. John was generally a good kid, but easily influenced by others. He would pick up behaviors from his classmates or girlfriends. In middle school, he had some mischievous friends and would sometimes misbehave. Anthony and I would scold him, but he never took it seriously. Fortunately, things changed in 9th grade. His new circle was more studious. He passed the exams for a public high school. It wasn't the best school, but definitely better than a rowdy private school. For better or worse, he is impressionable, so I wished for him to be around hard-working peers. At first, he did well in school, but by the time he hit 11th grade, his grades took a nosedive. Even when confronted, John didn't have much to say. He just wasn't motivated, it seemed. I had offered John tutoring or extra classes when I noticed he was struggling at school. "I don't need that," he vehemently declared. But his grades kept on plummeting. One day, I caught him walking hand in hand with a girl. That's when it clicked. His grades were falling because he had a girlfriend and was preoccupied with her. I was at my wit's end. Talking about love and relationships with a teenage boy, good luck getting through to him. If he finds out I saw them, he'll probably be mortified. And he might even take it out on me, making his grades worse. I decided to confide in Anthony. Anthony said, "Let me have a chat with him." After dinner, Anthony went to John's room and they started talking. Anxiously, I did the dishes and waited for Anthony to come back. About 30 minutes later, Anthony returned to the living room. I had a good talk with him. Just like you said, he got carried away with his new girlfriend. They were on long phone calls and texting even during exams. I reminded him that studies should come first, and he agreed to refocus. Anthony updated me. "Thank you." I sighed with relief, grateful for Anthony's steady parenting. If I had confronted John, it probably would have ended in an argument. From then on, John's grades gradually improved, reaching an average level. Soon enough, he was in his senior year of high school and became a college applicant. His grades weren't stellar, but there were colleges within his reach. He applied to those with higher chances of acceptance and got in successfully. Finally, I breathed a sigh of relief that we had managed to get him into college. With John becoming more independent, Anthony and I had more time to go on coffee dates and little trips, just like the early days of our marriage. I felt like we were dating again, or just newlyweds. Right after we got married, we rushed off on trips, thinking I'd soon be pregnant. That's why I wanted to go on a leisurely trip with my husband, just the two of us. As we spent quality time together, I couldn't help but notice how different our conversations are now. When we were dating, it was all about Anthony's work or my school life. Now, it's mostly about our son. Couples who've been through parenting end up talking about their kids, no matter how old they get. We got married quickly after I became pregnant, so we were still quite young. I was just about in my 30s, and Anthony was in his early 40s. That's why we could travel to many places. Then time flew, and John graduated college and started working. Just when we thought our parenting days were over, John dropped a bombshell. I've decided to get married. Anthony and I couldn't believe our ears. He just started working and he's already getting married? John's only been employed for about 6 months. That's way too soon. We were worried as parents, but then we realized we got married even earlier than he did. But Anthony was 25 and had been working for 3 years, so we still thought John was rushing things. Did she get pregnant or something? Is that why you're hurrying? Since we got married due to a pregnancy, we asked him that. But it turns out that's not the case. No, I genuinely want to marry her, John confidently said. Anthony and I felt relieved. It seems like John is truly in love, and that's comforting. He's passionate and employed, so that's a good start. A few days later, we meet John's fiancée. But Anthony and I are in for another surprise. Hi, I'm Haley. Next to John's fiancée is a child, roughly between 3rd and 6th grade. Our attention shifts entirely to the boy. Who's this young man? It can't possibly be John's child. So that means... This is Rowan, my stepchild. Stepchild? Turns out the boy is Haley's child from her previous marriage. We were stunned because we had no idea that there was a stepchild involved. I'm sorry, I haven't told my parents about the child yet. Ah, I see. Seeing our reaction, Haley also seemed puzzled. We can't stay silent forever, so I cautiously start to ask questions. So, where did you two meet? We met at work. Haley was a secretary at the company where I got my job. I see. How old are you, Haley? And how old is Rowan? I'm 30 and Rowan is 10. I see. So, she had her child when she was around 20, just like me. I hate to ask, but why did you divorce your previous husband? He cheated on me. I see. Mom, Dad, you're firing questions too fast. Sorry about that. We were a bit overwhelmed with all the new information, but John seemed committed to marriage and taking care of the child, so we gave our blessing. And so John and Haley got married. They've been living happily ever after with Rowan. There are concerns, but it's good to see John leading a happy married life. But then, about 6 months later, another issue arises. Anthony suddenly falls ill. This leads to a situation where he needs constant care. From that point on, I started taking care of Anthony at our home. Though we have ample savings, managing household chores and caregiving alone was tough. Still, I want to properly care for the man I committed my life to. That's what I was thinking when my son and his wife came to visit. Mom, isn't it hard to take care of Dad alone? How about we move in? What? Turns out they were suggesting that we all live together. I was thrilled when my son and daughter-in-law suggested that we live together, so we quickly moved in with each other. Although not related by blood, I was happy to spend more time with my step-grandchild. I hadn't met Rowan, our step-grandchild, more than a few times, but he always greeted me with a smile. He wasn't very talkative, but somehow we clicked. So I never minded spending time alone with Rowan. In fact, I found it therapeutic. We would naturally talk about Anthony, or I'd ask about school, and the conversations were always enjoyable. Life with my son's family was very fulfilling when I was spending time with Rowan. However, to be honest, the rest of it was not very enjoyable. Mom, didn't I ask you to wash my shirt? Well, I have caregiving duties. Please ask Haley to do the laundry. What? You're dumping chores on me? Isn't that harassment? Haley, you're busy with childcare. It's a job for Mom. My son and daughter-in-law had been bossy and demanding. Haley never did any housework and claimed to be busy with childcare, but it seemed like she wasn't doing anything from my point of view. John never took Rowan out anywhere and was always loafing around on his days off. And when they did prepare to go out, they left Rowan in my care and took off by themselves. Why do I have to make all these concessions? In the end, my responsibilities increased from housework to caregiving to childcare. Amidst this, sadly, Anthony's health deteriorated and he passed away. I was devastated. Anthony, despite requiring care, could still converse, and talking to him had been my stress reliever. With my long-term partner gone, it felt like there was a gaping hole in my heart. But it was my son and daughter-in-law who pulled me back to reality, although not in a good way. How much is Dad's inheritance? How much will we get? John said this right after the funeral was over. I was speechless, hearing John speak like he wasn't saddened by his father's death. I don't know. No, you need to find out. I want my fair share. Was John always like this? No, this must be Haley's influence. I realized since we moved in, Haley had no manners and seemed to only care about herself. It's like everything else doesn't matter and there's no need for consideration. And John was probably influenced by her lack of consideration for others. Fine, we had a lawyer. He should be holding the will. After explaining this to John, I collapsed on the sofa, drained. Grandma, are you okay? The one who asked this was Rowan. Yes, I'm okay, thank you. Grandma and Grandpa were always kind to me. Now I will grow strong to protect Grandma. Rowan. Moved, I stroked Rowan's head. Even without blood relations, bonds can deepen. That was exactly my relationship with Rowan. If Rowan could say such kind words, why couldn't John? Later, when the lawyer brought the will, my son and his wife complained about it. Isn't it unfair that Mom gets more? We are the ones who needed more financially. Look, it's what's written in the will. I don't care about that. So, Charlotte, you'd ignore us even if we're struggling financially? Well, if it comes to that, Rowan will just have to start working as soon as he finishes middle school. What? You'd make him drop out? If there's no inheritance, life will get tough. We won't be able to afford tuition, so Rowan would have to drop out and work. That's just... My son and his wife tried to exploit my close relationship with Rowan, becoming more confrontational and instilling fear in me. Fine, we can split it in half then, okay? Why didn't you say that in the first place? They agreed with a snide smile as I proposed this. From that point on, they kept threatening to make Rowan drop out, intimidating me. I felt compelled to comply with their demands, losing my spirit to resist and becoming submissive. Time flew, and before I knew it, Rowan had graduated college and was of working age. Has it really been over 10 years since we first met? Though I was filled with emotion, the hardship continued. My son and his wife continued to squat in my house even after Rowan became independent. Moreover, John quit his job and spent all day at home with Haley. I no longer had the energy to evict them, so just hoping for a peaceful day. I spent my days thinking that way. Then, 3 years later, it happened. Rowan is getting married? It was sudden news. It turns out that Rowan is getting married. And to my surprise, my son and his wife said, "Now we'll live on our own, so you're not needed anymore, housemaid. Please leave." What? They smirked, probably thinking I'd be shocked. But I couldn't contain my joy. Finally, 15 years of putting up with you both was worth it. My liberation day has come. What? What are you talking about? Confused, they didn't react as I expected. Just then, someone appeared behind me. "Grandma, I'm home. Welcome back, Rowan." "Rowan? Why are you back?" "You didn't say you'd be back today." I told Grandma. I was going to surprise you all about getting married, but looks like Mom and Dad spilled the beans. Rowan said this, and they smirked again. "Ah, so you were also looking forward to kicking Grandma out of this house?" "What? No, this house doesn't belong to anyone anymore." "What?" My son and his wife were shocked at Rowan's words. "What do you mean?" "Grandma already sold the house." "What the heck? Why would you do something like this?" John was fuming. His face beet red. "This house is in my name. I inherited it, so I have every right to sell it." "What are we supposed to do now? Where will we live?" "Yeah, we were planning on living here with Rowan and his wife as a family of 4. John and daughter-in-law were equally furious. But Rowan responded calmly. "Actually, that was a lie." "What?" "I'm planning on living somewhere else with my wife and Grandma. I came here today to pick her up." "Wait a minute, Rowan? Why are you taking this old woman with you? She's not even related by blood." "That doesn't matter. To me, Grandma is more family than my biological mom or stepdad ever were. I can't stand how you guys have always treated her. I lied about living together to throw you off guard. You would have treated my wife like a housekeeper, wouldn't you?" John and daughter-in-law looked shaken. "I can't expose my wife to people like you." "Are you abandoning your parents?" "I don't remember raising a child like you." "I don't remember being raised by you guys either. Leave the house before the cops get involved." "I can't believe this." John and daughter-in-law were in despair, their faces turning pale. And understandably so. The young couple, my son and his wife, were always buying designer goods and gallivanting around, even though neither worked. The money came from the inheritance they split with me. But money isn't endless, and they were close to depleting their share. They must felt lucky when Rowan decided to move in with them. Well, their luck ran out pretty fast. As they stood there with pale faces, I packed my bags with Rowan and left the house. After that, they were evicted and now supposedly live in an old apartment. They continue to spend recklessly, accumulating debt. Despite working multiple part-time jobs, they can't escape their mountain of debt due to their spending habits. On the other hand, I've moved into a spacious apartment where Rowan lives. Then Rowan got married, and now the three of us live together. Rowan's wife is such a wonderful person. I took to her immediately. Having trained as a beautician, I sometimes cut and style their hair. Everyone at work always compliments me on the styles you do, grandma-in-law. Rowan's wife is always delighted to report this. Now, every day is joyous as we gather around the dinner table, and I couldn't be happier.
Fiancé, the one you've promised to marry. Once upon a time, I had a fiancé, but I didn't end up sharing my life with him because of my sister. I was in deep despair back then, but now I found new happiness. And I want to show my sister and my ex-fiancé just that. My name is Catherine. I'm not particularly beautiful, just an average office worker. But back then, I had a man who had promised to marry me. His name was Bob. Bob was a handsome guy, working in a reputable company, the so-called hottie. We were really happy back then. Happiness that I thought would last forever. But the cruel reality dealt me a harsh hand. I couldn't get married to Bob. The cause of it all was my sister. My sister's name is Sophie. Sophie has always been interested in fashion, and she is still as fashion conscious as ever. In fact, Sophie was always much more conscious about her appearance than me, and was always pretty. Therefore, Sophie had been popular with boys since she was in middle school. She even once was an amateur model for a fashion magazine. Because of that, Sophie dreamed of becoming a model. When I graduated from college and was working at a regular company, I was once invited to dinner by a business partner. That partner was Bob. One day, after having connected with Bob a few times and occasionally going out for meals together, something unexpected happened. That day, Bob invited me for dinner after work. Naturally, I had no reason to refuse and went out for the meal. On the way back that evening, Bob confessed his feelings for me. I was surprised at his sudden confession, but I also had feelings for him, so we ended up dating. After a year of dating, Bob proposed to me, and I was overjoyed. Of course I accepted his proposal. A few days later, Bob and I visited my parents' house to report our engagement and to greet them. My parents were, of course, thrilled. We talked about wedding plans, and I was very happy. But not everyone was pleased. That person was my younger sister, Sophie. Sophie was surprised to learn that I was getting married, and was even more taken aback when she saw who I was marrying. Sophie, who was more attractive and had been asked out by various men, always looked down on me, who had little romantic experience. I don't want my embarrassing sister to be known to my friends. That was what Sophie would always say. The sister who she deemed uncool was getting married before her, and to a successful man from a famous company. This seemed to hurt Sophie's pride even more. But I was completely oblivious to Sophie's feelings. I should have noticed her attitude at this point. One day, Sophie asked, "If you're going to be my brother-in-law, can we exchange contact information?" Bob and I saw no reason to refuse, so we readily agreed. Since I was about to leave my job, there were many days when I had to stay late for the transition process. Then on a day when my parents were out of town, Sophie took a certain action. In hindsight, it was probably a plan she had thought of from the beginning. Once I retired, I planned to move away from my family home and start living with Bob. She probably wanted to execute her plan while I was still at home. Sophie first called Bob to our house. "Bob, my sister suddenly came home sick. Our parents are out of town and I'm feeling uneasy being alone. Could you come over?" Sophie lied, saying that I had cut my work short due to a sudden illness. Bob, who was just about to head home from work, hurried to our house without suspecting a thing. I rushed over because I heard Catherine was ill. Where is she? Of course, I wasn't there. It was only natural for Bob to think so. However, Sophie confessed, "I'm sorry, Bob. I lied to you. My sister isn't sick. She's still at work." Upon hearing this, Bob didn't get angry at Sophie, but instead asked, "Why would you lie like that?" "I just really needed to talk to you, Bob," Sophie started to explain. Having wrapped up work, I reached home and was surprised. It was because Bob was there. Yet, without really questioning it, I cheerfully said, "Oh, you're here." Later, I was about to experience the most intense despair and sadness I've ever felt in my life. Catherine, I'm sorry. I want to break up. It was sudden. I was unable to comprehend the meaning of his words immediately. What? You're kidding, right? Break up? What do you mean? Just as I was pressing Bob for answers, Sophie showed up. Catherine, actually, I'm dating Sophie. I'm sorry, Catherine. I've fallen in love with Sophie, more than you. Still confused and in disbelief, Sophie then said to me, I'm sorry, but Bob has decided to marry me. I was totally lost. Then Sophie continued, you might not want to attend our wedding ceremony, but do come to the reception, won't you? All I could do after that was cry. Sophie had taken away my fiancé. I was discarded. Both my dad and mom were extremely worried. For a while, I couldn't leave my room. Since I'd already quit my job, there was nothing I could do. I received several messages from my coworkers asking when the wedding was. I told them it was going to be a simple ceremony with just family. Months later, I found myself in a strange place. Here, I'd start my life anew. I wanted to be happy again. Truly happy this time. After breaking up with Bob, I was holed up for a while, but a certain emotion was born within me. Why do I have to suffer like this? Forget that guy, and let's start over. Things progressed rapidly from there. I talked to my dad and mom, deciding to leave home and live on my own. A completely unfamiliar place, but it was a really pleasant place, rich in greenery and peaceful. My parents didn't stop me and even helped me a lot during the move. After the move, while taking a break, I heard this from my mom. A few days after you locked yourself in your room, Bob came. He told me everything that happened between you two, and then he apologized. I didn't understand why my parents were apologizing. Of course, what Bob did is unforgivable. His parents came to apologize too, even kneeling down. But we heard about Sophie as well. I know you can't forgive her, Catherine, but Sophie is also a daughter to us, my parents explained. Both my dad and mom were distressed. She had done something terrible to me. Of course, they couldn't forgive such a person. But Sophie didn't listen to them, and it seems she went to Bob. Since then, Bob had been coming to our house at the same time every day, apologizing and asking for his marriage to Sophie to be approved. Because of Bob's actions, my parents had no choice but to accept. That's why they apologized to me for accepting his marriage to Sophie. Honestly, I didn't care anymore, but I could painfully understand my parents' feelings. It's all in the past now, it's okay. Besides, I'll meet someone better in the future, I replied positively, holding back the tears. My mom was crying. My father looked apologetic, but I said to him, when I have children, I'm going to rely on you a lot. Both my dad and mom responded with smiles. Mom was very concerned, saying, don't hesitate to get in touch if anything comes up. As I started getting used to my new life and had some peace of mind, I began working at a small restaurant. The staff was small in number, but the place was very bright and I really liked the friendly atmosphere everyone had. The manager was a man named Steve, who was often teased by the part-timers. Watching their banter was enjoyable and created a warm atmosphere. A few months after I started working, a fateful event that would impact my future took place. I was confessed to by Steve. It happened when he was giving me a ride home after work. To be honest, I was unsure. Steve was a really good guy. Above all, very kind. He had both the looks and the personality that would be attractive to the opposite sex, but I was still hung up on that incident. I was scared that I might be abandoned again. Steve seemed to notice my hesitation and told me that I didn't have to give an immediate answer, and he went home for the day. Things were a little awkward for a while, but thanks to the usual banter with the part-timers and Steve's kindness, I didn't fret too much. I guess my heart had already made a decision. During one break, I learned something about Steve. Turns out, Steve had been betrayed by someone he was dating and had a terrible experience at the place he worked before this restaurant. Steve and I had the same experience. We both had been betrayed by someone we loved. That day, I decided to go home with Steve so I could hear more about his story. As we were walking home, Steve shared his past. He was actually in charge of a store before he came here. But due to certain incidents, the store lost trust and ended up closing. And Steve was held responsible and lost his job. After hearing his story, I decided to tell Steve why I came to this place. After I finished, Steve said, "You did great." He said that to me, who, despite the pain, stood up and faced forward again. I was overjoyed, and I realized that this was exactly what I wanted to hear. I did my best. I was betrayed by someone I loved and went through a tough time, but I managed to bounce back. Honestly, it was very hard. And I told Steve, "You did great too." Steve was smiling, and then I gave my answer to his confession from that day. "I'm a bit of a handful, but I hope you'll be patient with me." After that, the teasing from the part-timers at the restaurant increased, but they were genuinely happy. "Congrats! Wishing you happiness forever." It's too early for that line. So there will be a time eventually. I'll say it again then. You better let me say it, or else. Oh, wait. Steve was a little flustered. I was laughing. Everyone was laughing. It was pure bliss. That was a typical day until a certain point. I was proposed to for the second time in my life. Of course, I accepted the proposal. I was determined to find happiness this time, and I believed that I could be truly happy with Steve. So I headed over to my parents' house for the first time in a while. They were thrilled. I told them everything about Steve, and they said, "Please make our daughter happy. I promise I'll make Catherine happy." He replied with firmness and confidence. We chatted for a while. Then my dad hesitantly said, "Sophie and Bob are going to get married." They said an invitation might come, but I didn't need to stress over it. I wasn't bothered anyway, because I was happy too. In fact, I wanted to flaunt my happiness. When I told my parents that, they said, "If Catherine says so, Steve, we're counting on you if anything happens." A few days later, an invitation to Sophie's wedding arrived. I decided to attend, of course. I responded saying that both of us would be attending. Steve and I had only legally married because Sophie was planning her wedding. We figured it would put too much pressure on our parents and relatives if we had our weddings back to back. We had vowed to have our wedding ceremony once things had settled down. On the day of Sophie's wedding, Steve and I were heading to the venue together. We were reunited with Sophie and Bob, whom we haven't seen in a long time. Bob looked somewhat worn out. During the family introductions, I introduced Steve, saying, "This is my husband, Steve. I'm very proud of him." For some reason, Sophie was visibly surprised when I introduced Steve, which was memorable. On the other hand, I had something I desperately wanted to ask Bob. What had happened between him and Sophie on the day when neither my parents nor I were around? Initially, Bob found it hard to talk, but gradually began to share. Apparently, when Sophie called him on that day and he learned that I was suddenly ill, Bob decided to wait for me. Sophie then came in with strong liquor, saying it would be a waste not to enjoy. Bob, not a heavy drinker, had a couple of drinks and ended up getting drunk. Then, according to him, Sophie saw her chance and started to seduce him. Bob was too drunk to make sound judgments, so he gave in to her advances. Sophie was stunning. In addition, she had a great figure, so it's understandable for a regular guy to fall for her advances. Even so, Bob and I were engaged. However, Bob succumbed to the temptation, and from that point on, he started to pay attention to Sophie. Even after sharing this story, Bob kept apologizing to me, but at that moment, he seemed like such a small man to me. Honestly, I couldn't have cared less. I was just relieved to know the truth. Meanwhile, Steve and Sophie were talking about something. I was curious about it, but since Sophie's wedding was imminent, I decided to ask later. On the way home, I asked Steve, "Were you a bit upset when you were talking to Sophie?" "Well, as I told you before, she was my ex who betrayed me, and that's not all. She's the reason why I lost my job." I was utterly surprised. What a small world. Moreover, the fact that she was the cause of the closure of Steve's shop made it even more shocking. I decided to dig deeper. Apparently, a few months after Sophie started dating Steve, she had an affair with a certain designer. It seems Sophie thought it would be more beneficial for her to date someone in the modeling industry, even though she was dating Steve. Upon accidentally discovering this fact, Steve naturally got angry at Sophie, but Sophie in turn got angry at him, and they broke up. However, Sophie's anger didn't subside, and she created a fake photo of foreign objects in the dishes taken at Steve's restaurant and shared it on social media. At the time, Sophie was also doing some model work, so she had quite a few followers, and the photo spread rapidly. It even caught the attention of Steve's boss, who had left the business to him. Due to the decreased revenue, the restaurant ended up closing. As a result, Steve was fired, bearing the responsibility. Naturally, he held a grudge against this incident. However, since he didn't know who was responsible, he didn't know where to direct his anger. In the midst of all this, he learned the truth when a friend invited him for a drink. A friend of Steve's girlfriend happened to know Sophie and had seen her bragging on social media about causing a restaurant to close. Of course, Steve's friend didn't know that the now closed shop was Steve's. Steve, who unexpectedly found the culprit, could no longer do anything, so he decided to start over in a different place. That's when he met me. I apologized to Steve. I'm sorry for the horrible things my sister did. Honestly, I'm the sister of the person who messed up Steve's life. I didn't know what to do. I seriously thought that Steve might hate me. But Steve said, "It's in the past and it's not your fault, Catherine." I was honestly relieved. And once again, we decided to be happy together. Later, Sophie was finally punished. Sophie was going to do a photo shoot, and the place she visited for the shoot, it was our home, of all places. Indeed, it was rich in greenery and likely to take good pictures. Sophie seemed to be considering becoming a model, using this photo shoot as a stepping stone. The incident occurred at a restaurant she visited for dinner. That restaurant was none other than Steve's. I wasn't working at Steve's place anymore, so I heard about it later. As soon as they entered, both Steve and Sophie recognized each other. And immediately, Steve said, "I'm sorry, I can't let you enter," and refused Sophie's group from entering. Of course, the staff got angry and asked what was going on. Steve explained everything, what Sophie had done in the past and the hardships he had endured because of her. "She has a criminal record and I have solid evidence. I don't want to go through the same thing again, so I refuse to let her enter." No one could say anything, and Sophie seemed to have turned pale. Furthermore, Steve said he would tell the president of the company Sophie was about to join about her past. The person who scouted Sophie was shocked and asked Steve to quit, but Steve's anger didn't subside. In the end, Sophie's photo shoot was canceled, and the incident spread in the industry, crushing her dream of becoming a model. Nobody wants to deal with a person who caused such a huge scandal in the past. On top of that, I heard from my mom that Bob's company's performance has been getting worse recently, and now he's a candidate for a demotion. She seemed worried about what would become of these two in the future. Despite such an incident, Steve and I were spending happy days as usual. And today is our long-awaited wedding. Steve and I, we both had some hard times in the past, but now we are very happy. There was also a new life in my belly. Congratulations! Wishing you a lifetime of happiness. The crew from the shop where we first met are laughing and repeating this familiar phrase. Thank you. And so, in front of everyone, Steve and I vowed to always cherish our family and be happy forever.
My name is Laura. 6 months ago, I married my high school sweetheart, Matt. We'd known each other since we were kids, so I've always been close to his family. That made getting married a breeze. We share a lot of mutual friends, so our wedding was a joyful occasion with lots of well-wishers. I vowed to stand by Matt for the rest of our lives. A few months after tying the knot, I found out I was pregnant. I was on cloud 9. But the blessings didn't stop there. Matt's mom was incredibly supportive, helping us out almost every day. We'd been living with Matt's parents since we got married. Matt is an only child and was raised with a lot of love and care. So, when we decided to get married, living with his parents seemed like the natural choice. I had no issues with it, so I agreed right away. From the day after our wedding, I enjoyed doing household chores with my mother-in-law and chatting about various things. When I announced my pregnancy, she cried tears of joy, as if it were her own good news. Whenever I tried to do something around the house, she'd say, "Don't worry, Laura, I've got this," and take over. "I'm feeling fine today, really." But she'd insist, "You have to think of the baby first, rest up," and stopped me from doing anything. I appreciated her concern, but it got to the point where I was bored out of my mind. I had been working part-time, but I quit my job as soon as I found out I was pregnant, on the advice of both my mother-in-law and Matt. So with nothing to do at home, I was going stir-crazy. I feel like moving around a bit. Can I go shopping? Need anything? She'd say, absolutely not. You're not even in your second trimester yet. You need to rest. And wouldn't let me leave the house. I understood she was concerned for me, but it was suffocating. She had a miscarriage before she was pregnant with Matt because she continued working. So she was worried I'd end up the same way. If you're not careful, you'll end up in the hospital like I did, she'd warn me. I didn't want to create tension, so I decided to take it easy until my second trimester. Once I reached that milestone, she started allowing me short walks. Matt and I would go out on his days off. We'd buy some snacks from a local store and have a little picnic. Or sometimes I'd go for a walk with my mother-in-law while shopping. She even started cooking with me again. I realized she was just concerned for me during the early stages of my pregnancy. Then, at 38 weeks, my water broke while I was climbing the stairs at home. Matt and my father-in-law were at work, so my mother-in-law drove me to the hospital. Matt had already coordinated everything with the hospital, so by the time Brian was born, he was right there with us. First, Matt held Brian in his arms. Oh, he's so adorable, Matt said, his eyes welling up with tears as he lovingly looked at Brian. Seeing him like that made me tear up too. Thank you, Laura. I'm so happy right now, Matt said, smiling at me, and I couldn't help but cry. May I come in? My mother-in-law, who had kindly stepped out of the room, peeked her head in. Go ahead and hold him, Mom. He's really cute. Matt handed Brian over to her. I felt a bit awkward. My mother-in-law had been so supportive and was eagerly awaiting her grandchild. What would she say now that Brian was here? The thought made me anxious. Thanks to you, we were able to have Brian safely. Thank you so much. When I said that to her, she blurted out something unexpected. He doesn't look like him. What? I had to ask her to repeat herself. What do you mean? He doesn't look like Matt. Are you sure he's Matt's child? What was she talking about? This should be a happy time, but my heart was racing uncontrollably. What are you saying? Matt immediately confronted her, but she continued without apologizing. Look at the baby pictures of Matt. Brian doesn't look like him at all. She showed us a baby picture of Matt on her phone. Well, they don't have to look exactly alike. Before I could finish, she stormed out of the room, saying, I can't deal with a child whose parentage is in question. Hey, Mom. Matt followed her out, leaving me alone. I looked at Brian's face and started to cry. He looked so much like Matt, especially around the eyes and ears. Matt never returned to the room, only texting me, saying he was going home with his mom. I couldn't believe his behavior, but I was too exhausted to confront him. A few days later, on the day of my discharge, Matt came to pick me up, but seemed down. What's wrong? We get to live together starting today, I said, but he didn't look happy. Mom's still upset. Try not to provoke her. I just gave birth and am mentally and physically exhausted. Why do I have to be considerate of her on the day I'm discharged? I didn't say anything to Matt, and the ride home was silent. The tension didn't ease up even after we got home. In fact, as soon as I got home, my mother-in-law said to me, Oh, you're back? I was treated with such sarcasm. My father-in-law avoided eye contact, and my mother-in-law made snide remarks. I've told you many times this child is Matt's. His name is Brian. Won't you please love him? But she ignored me completely. Say something, Matt, I cried to Matt, but he coldly said, Well, it's true. He doesn't look like me. At that moment, my tears stopped. Matt, who should have been on my side, had abandoned me. Looking back, Matt should have stood up to his mother that day. But in the end, he sided with her. I felt empty and gave up on the idea of my mother-in-law ever loving Brian. Matt wasn't helping with childcare either, and my stress kept piling up. Can you feed him formula while I take a shower? When I asked, Matt said, I've been working all day. Why should I lose sleep over a child who might not even be mine? I can't believe this. Never mind. I fed Brian the formula myself and took a quick shower as soon as he fell asleep. That was my life. If it had only been my mother-in-law, I would have gotten a DNA test to prove her wrong. But even Matt didn't believe Brian was his. That hurt more than anything. My parents had moved to the countryside, so I couldn't rely on them. My parents, who originally wanted to live in a place rich in nature, moved away soon after I got married, so I couldn't rely on them right away. They had been so happy about my marriage and trusted Matt. They loved Matt as if he was their own child. That's why I couldn't tell them what was happening. After months of this, my mother-in-law, who had been ignoring me, finally spoke. "Laura, can you bring the baby to the living room?" "All right." My mother-in-law had been ignoring me and not paying any attention to Brian. I thought she was going to apologize. However, my expectations were quickly dashed. When I got to the living room, both she and Matt were sitting there. "Could you please leave with that child?" "What?" I was stunned and couldn't find the words. She looked at Brian and said, "He still doesn't look like him. I've had enough." Matt said nothing. At that point, I didn't care anymore. "Fine, if that's how you feel, I'll pack my things and leave," I said, signing the divorce papers and started packing. Matt said nothing and continued chatting with his mother.
Make sure you pay child support.
"How can we, when we're not even sure he's Matt's?" my mother-in-law retorted. I was so angry, I left without another word and went to my parents' house. I explained everything, and although they were initially confused, they welcomed me. I decided to stay with them until I found a job and saved some money. I, of course, had requested child support for my ex-husband through a lawyer, but the money was never transferred. I myself didn't want to have anything to do with my ex or his parents anymore, so I never pressed the issue of the unpaid child support. Years passed. Brian was about 6 years old. I got a call from a local friend who also knew Matt, informing me that Matt had died in a car accident. Of course, I heard about it right after it happened, but I didn't want to get involved, and Brian was going through a busy, active phase, so we didn't attend the funeral. Months later, I happened to be meeting up with local friends and returned to my hometown for the first time in years. Before going to my friend's house, I decided to buy a gift, so Brian and I went to a department store we used to visit as a family. "Laura?" I turned around to see my mother-in-law, whom I hadn't seen in years. As I stood there stunned, she quickly approached us and said, "You're Brian, right?" and started talking to Brian. "Brian, I'm your grandma. You really look just like Matt." My mother-in-law said that. I couldn't stand hearing her say that. "Enough is enough. Because of you, we—" As I said this, she interrupted. "Don't be so angry. I've wanted to see you for so long." Feeling like I was about to yell, I said, "Excuse us," and pulled Brian away, leaving the scene. "Was that Grandma?" Brian asked. I had kept it a secret until now, but Brian, now in elementary school, was genuinely curious and kept asking. "Isn't Grandma supposed to be your mom? Who was that lady?" I couldn't hide it any longer, so I explained it to Brian in simple terms when we got home. Brian said, "Mama, you've been through a lot, huh?" and patted my head. Tears flowed at his kindness. I felt grateful from the bottom of my heart for having him. Months later, my mother-in-law showed up at the apartment where Brian and I were living. "How did you find this place?" When I asked, she said, "I asked around, Matt and your mutual friends. I finally found you," and forced her way in. "Please leave." As I said this, she exclaimed, "Matt died in an accident and my husband died of illness. You two are all the family I have left." Brian came out of the next room, perhaps hearing my mother-in-law's loud voice. Seeing Brian, my mother-in-law said, "Brian, why don't you come live with Grandma? I have a bigger house and can feed you lots of delicious food." "Stop it!" As I said this, my mother-in-law pulled out a thick envelope. "It has $50,000 for child support. You two are all the family I have left, so please come live with me." She pushed the envelope toward me. Then she turned to Brian and said, Brian, Grandma wants to live with you. I'll buy you anything you want, okay? And smiled. In that moment, I felt like crying. I was torn between the feeling of, why now? And wondering if it was okay to deprive Brian of one more grandmother. I was at a loss for words. Then Brian said, I'm not going. Huh? My mother-in-law let out a baffled sound at Brian's words. Brian, what are you saying? You can live with Grandma, you know. There'll be lots of delicious food and I'll buy you toys. My mother-in-law tried desperately to persuade him. I don't want to. You were mean to Mama, right? My only grandma is Mommy's mom. Saying this, Brian shook off my mother-in-law's hand and sat next to me. My mother-in-law fell silent, looking as if she'd lost all hope. After staring at us for a moment, she abruptly stood up and left the house without a word. We haven't heard from her since that day. Of course, she never came to visit us either. The child support money she left behind is being saved for Brian, untouched to this day. When I consulted my parents about whether to return the money, they said, You never received child support before, so it's fine to keep it. And so I decided to keep it. I don't know what's become of my mother-in-law since then, but honestly, it doesn't matter to me now. Because I have Brian, who's so strong and stands by me. Brian, who protected me from my mother-in-law even at his young age. Brian, who chose me over my mother-in-law's sweet temptations. I love him from the bottom of my heart. I want to continue raising him responsibly, ensuring his happiness, even without a father, now and forever.
My name is Rosalind. I'm a housewife. I'm currently living with my husband Kevin's family. My father-in-law has passed away, so it's me, my mother-in-law Emily, Kevin, and our 6-month-old daughter sharing the house. But let me tell you, Emily is someone I can't let my guard down around. She's super protective of Kevin, even checking to see if his shoelaces are tied. She hasn't cut the apron strings yet. That would be fine, except she calls me the thief who stole Kevin. I'm at my wit's end. I've tried just to ignore her and not to get too involved in her life. But there's a limit to that too. Whenever I'm doing housework, she has something to complain about. If you wash dishes like that, they won't get clean. Do it right. Or, your cleaning is too shallow. Spend more time and vacuum every corner. I thought I was doing everything properly, but she always starts with criticism. I didn't know what to do. Worse still, Kevin doesn't do anything to stop her. All moms are like that. Just get along, is all he'd say. I'm not looking for advice on how to get along. I want him to stop her. But even if I say that, he only responds with, Mother-in-law and daughter-in-law conflict is your issue, not mine. So I couldn't count on Kevin, and Emily made life unbearable every single day. My only solace was raising our newborn daughter. I can honestly say my daughter keeps me sane. But recently, Emily came up with a new way to harass me. You're cheating on Kevin, aren't you? What? I couldn't help but raise my voice. I had no idea why she would think that. When I asked her why, she said, Kevin's coworker has been mentioning your name a lot lately. Why would his coworker know about you? I had no clue. Maybe Kevin told his coworker about me, but Emily wouldn't even consider that. She kept calling me an adulteress and even started saying that our daughter was the product of an affair. This kid is genuinely mine and Kevin's, I swear. I'd even be okay with a DNA test. But whenever I suggest that, Emily just dismisses it, saying, Science isn't trustworthy. If you can't trust science, then what can you trust in this world? But that's just how Emily is. She never stopped accusing me of cheating and kept harassing me. At times, she'd splash water on me or intentionally startle our daughter, who I was carrying on my back, making her cry. Having to soothe my crying daughter each time was mentally draining. My daughter was undoubtedly stressed too. Through all this, Kevin didn't lift a finger to help. What does he think of our daughter and me? Days passed in this toxic environment of Emily's harassment and Kevin's indifference. Then Kevin decided to invite a colleague over for dinner. Turns out, it was the same colleague who had ignited the cheating rumors in the first place. Thinking this could clear the air, I agreed to join the dinner party. On the day of the dinner party, I was eager to clear up the misunderstanding, but as soon as it started, Kevin and Emily chugged their beers. Meanwhile, I was stuck making appetizers. No chance to clear the air at all. I really want to resolve this misunderstanding, but finding the right moment to talk with my colleagues has been impossible. While I was wondering what to do, Emily and Kevin got completely drunk. There's no way I can clear things up now. Then Emily starts to make a scene. Worried that she'd break stuff, I tried to stop her. Big mistake. Emily grabbed me and yelled, "You cheater! Don't slack off!" and poured beer all over me. I was okay, but the beer splashed on our 6-month-old daughter as well. She ingested some of it. Neither showed any concern that our daughter had consumed alcohol. Thankfully, the sober colleague realized the gravity of the situation and called an ambulance. Kevin and Emily were angry, saying, "You ruined our good time." But they were far from rational. Who gives a baby beer? Yet they're not worried at all, which is just unbelievable. My daughter and I had to rush to the hospital in an ambulance, and she had to be admitted immediately. The coworker has come along looking incredibly apologetic. It's not the coworker's fault, but still. The next day, thankfully, my daughter was out of danger, but they decided to run some tests and keep her in the hospital for another day. When I returned home, both Kevin and Emily were glaring at me. "See, I told you, this woman can't be trusted," Emily said to Kevin. Emily was giving Kevin an earful. She said that me going to the hospital last night with my colleague was proof of an affair. I was baffled, truly. My daughter could have lost her life, and her real father wasn't even there for her. I think that's a lot more serious, don't you? Emily came up to me and said, "You cheating witch! You went to a hotel, not a hospital, didn't you?" I couldn't take it anymore. I raised my hand to slap her. Then Emily shrieked, "Oh my God, she's hitting me! I knew she was a devil!" Kevin took Emily's side, making me out to be the villain. "What a terrible wife you are! You do want to be with that other guy," Emily added. My head began to ache. Why is their thinking so twisted? I couldn't take it anymore. My daughter was in the hospital, and I didn't want to stay in that house a second longer. I found myself running aimlessly, and before I knew it, I was at a nearby park. I sat down on a swing and started to ponder what lay ahead. What if the test results show that my daughter has severe long-term health issues? What if, in the worst-case scenario, the test revealed life-threatening complications? As these thoughts swirled in my head, tears started to flow uncontrollably. But I knew that sharing these worries with Kevin and Emily would be pointless. They'd never understand. They'd probably say, "If you're so worried, she must be the child of your affair." How could they be so callous toward their own daughter and granddaughter? Lost in thought, my colleague appeared at the park. My coworker listened to my worries and concerns, occasionally nodding along. Getting it all out felt like a weight lifted off my shoulders. I was embarrassed to cry in front of my coworker, though. Once I had cleared my mind, I decided to ask my coworker something that had been bothering me. "Why did you tell Kevin my name?" Kevin's colleague had something surprising to say. It was a golden opportunity to get back at Kevin and Emily for all the awful things they had done. With my colleague's help, I planned my perfect revenge. "The moment you walk in, look who's with her," Emily spouted as I returned home. Kevin glared at me with contempt. "I can't believe it. I thought you were a good colleague." I let out some harsh words toward my coworker. It seemed like they didn't want to admit that they might be wrong. My coworker looked upset and started to say something, but I interrupted. Kevin, you're getting fired. Kevin looked confused and said, What? Clearly, he didn't understand what was going on. Well, it's understandable. This is pretty out of the blue. I decided to explain things step by step. My uncle is the CEO of the company where you and your coworker work. What? Your relative? Kevin's astonished. Can't blame him. Even I didn't know this at first. I've been friendly with my uncle since I was a child. He always treated me well. This New Year's, he was even moved to tears seeing my newborn daughter. He had always said I could turn to him if I ever needed anything, but I never thought he'd be Kevin's boss. The reason our coworker knew so much about me is because my uncle showed off pictures of me and my daughter at a party. It's clear he truly cares about me. So why am I getting fired? Kevin interrupted my explanation. I thought it would be obvious why he's getting fired, but Kevin seemed slow to catch on. My daughter was urgently hospitalized. My uncle naturally was furious. My coworker had reported the incident to my uncle, and as a result, Kevin, the mastermind, was going to be fired. Kevin still wasn't convinced. This is ridiculous. You can't fire me over something like this. I wanted to say the same thing about his ridiculous claim. Sure, Emily was technically the one who spilled the beer, but Kevin didn't stop her. Kevin, why didn't you stop her? When I asked Kevin, Kevin said, I thought that baby was a result of an affair between the coworker and you. How long will he keep saying such stupid things? I was too stunned to respond. Then Emily chimed in. Exactly. It's your fault for having an affair in the first place. Emily seemed very angry, but her claim had no basis. My coworker and I never had an affair, and we've clarified this to my uncle. No matter how much Emily shouts about an affair, her claim won't hold water. Just being fired wouldn't be enough for me. I had prepared something for this moment. Sign this. What I presented to Kevin was a divorce petition. He was shocked yet again. Perhaps he never imagined things would go this far after all the terrible things he'd done. If you think I'm just here for your convenience, you're sorely mistaken. Are you kidding me? There's no way I'm agreeing to a divorce. Kevin brushed off the divorce papers I had presented. Even if you refuse the divorce, we'll just end up in mediation. I have detailed notes on every wrong you've committed against me, complete with dates. With ample evidence documented, mediation would likely swing in my favor. So even if Kevin refuses to divorce, it would only waste time and money if we went to mediation. I'm asking you to stop this pointless resistance. When I told Kevin this, he burst into tears saying, Please don't divorce me. I don't want to lose my job either. Well, he should have thought of that before allowing Emily to harass me. Now it's too convenient for him to ask for forgiveness. Throughout this conversation, Emily looked on blankly, as if this had nothing to do with her. As if she wasn't the root cause of all this trouble. That's not happening. I had also prepared a strategy to make Emily pay for her actions. Emily, you'll need to compensate for all the wrongs you've done. When I said that, Emily started to panic. Why me? We were talking about Kevin. While Kevin is guilty, the direct harassment came from you, Emily. It would be strange if you weren't punished. Both Kevin and Emily refused to accept it and began making excuses. Like mother, like son, I thought. Emily starts shifting the blame onto me. If our reasoning is correct, then it's not our fault. You're the one who's making us uncomfortable. So it's your fault. She insists. If we let this kind of logic slide, it spells the end for any kind of reasonable society. That kind of behavior is absolutely not allowed. Please grow up and take responsibility for your actions, I said calmly. Both clung to me. Stop this. All this started because of the affair, right? Let's just forgive each other and move on. Forgive each other? For the last time, I never cheated. Emily made it up in her head. Her grip on reality was slipping. This must be a dream. There's no way something like this could happen to me. Kevin, you must be dreaming too. She seemed desperate to escape reality. Kevin was overwhelmed, worried about losing his job and the potential alimony. What am I going to do now? How will I live? My life is over. He seemed anxious about his future. Well, he brought this on himself. I hope he learns from this. Look, I'll be consulting a lawyer for the next steps. From now on, let's communicate through my attorney. Goodbye. With that, I left the house. I could hear Kevin and Emily shouting something, but no matter how loud they were, I didn't turn back. Afterwards, I consulted a lawyer, divorced Kevin, and received a significant amount of alimony. Thanks to my coworker, Kevin lost his job. He tried to find a new one, but was unsuccessful, and now he's scraping by, with day labor wearing himself out. Emily, because of her betrayal, ended up paying me a hefty sum, draining her retirement funds. She couldn't get by on her pension alone, so she started part-time work at a supermarket, but she hurt her back lifting heavy things and ended up bedridden. Kevin had to step up and take care of Emily. Despite having no prior caregiving experience, the burden became so overwhelming to him that he had to quit his day job. Emily, who never really cut the apron strings, and Kevin, who had accepted this dynamic. I used to think their unique relationship would last a lifetime. However, the moment Emily needed care, I heard Kevin started treating her like she was in the way. After all the terrible things she's done to me, her son mistreating her now must make her regretful. It's too late for regrets. I hope she spends the rest of her life lamenting her choices. Eventually, through an introduction from my uncle, I met a new man and remarried successfully. Now, I live happily with him. I can't thank the coworker and my uncle enough for helping me out. I plan on repaying this kindness little by little for the rest of my life.
My name is Emma, and I'm 26 years old. I'm a working professional living alone in an apartment. My family consists of my mom and my brother George. My mom has been living alone ever since my dad passed away from illness 5 years ago. George got married 2 years ago. I thought he'd settle down after marriage, but he seems to be working harder than ever. While we do keep in touch through calls, our busy schedules make it tough to spend time with Mom. Then, an occasion for all of us to gather came around. It was time for a visit to Dad's grave. Seeing Mom after a long time, she looked like she'd lost some weight but was still smiling as ever. George brought along his wife, Violet. I haven't spoken much with Violet, but I find her to be friendly and kind. She's a stay-at-home wife by her own choice, likely taking good care of my hardworking brother every day. Even now, she was listening to Mom and helping her make coffee. As we sipped our coffee, we caught up on each other's lives, and it was about time to leave. Mom, why don't we rebuild this house and you come live with us? George suddenly looked serious and made this suggestion. Both Mom and I were caught off guard. The house is old, and it must be inconvenient for you, Mom. We can look after you, and besides, I've always wanted to do something for you, Mom. It would cost a lot, you know. I make decent money, and we have Dad's inheritance. Now's the time to use it. Realizing how much thought George had put into this, I felt grateful. I wondered if there was something I could do too. That's when I noticed Violet's face tense up for a moment. Don't worry, I've discussed it with Violet before, and she's okay with it, George said. In an instant, Violet's usual kind smile returned. Indeed, I think it's a great idea. She had returned to her usual gentle smile. I brushed it off as my imagination and took another sip of coffee. Mom pondered for a bit. If you'll tell me that much. And finally accepted George's offer. You can stay with me while the house is under construction. Really? Are you sure? Why hesitate? I have space and it's not an issue. After that, I also suggested that I use Dad's inheritance to help with the funds. Save that money until you get married. That's what Mom and George told me. Well, I couldn't argue with that. So plans were made for Mom to live with George and Violet, providing the land and contributing to the rebuilding costs. 6 months later, I received news that the new house was complete and a moving date was set. Today is finally the moving day. While cleaning up after breakfast, I talked to Mom, who was busy packing. I'm sorry I can't help with the move. I've told Violet I can't get time off from work. Don't worry, dear. George and Violet are there, and we have the movers as well. She smiles and says it's okay, and my heart feels a little lighter. Her voice sounded cheerful. Seeing Mom so spirited while packing made me realize just how much she'd lost her zest for life after Dad passed away. I couldn't be more grateful to George. I was surprised when George said that, but honestly, I was overjoyed. After Patrick passed away, I thought I'd be living quietly on my own, but now I'm wondering if I deserve to be this happy. I just laughed and said, Of course you do. My mom grabbed her packed suitcase and left the house with a spring in her step. Somehow, I managed to dodge overtime and started heading home before sundown. I wonder if she's having a good time with George right now. Given how much she was looking forward to it, she must be. While pondering what to give them as a housewarming gift, I hear my name. Emma! I stop walking and look toward the voice. In the dim light, I see my mom with a sad look on her face. Her morning purse is hanging heavily on her slender arm. Mom? I was surprised and ran over to Mom, who looked down. Mom, what are you doing here? When I press her, she says, Living together isn't going to work. Violet asked me to leave. That's what Violet told me. Feeling disoriented but seeing my nearly tearful mom, I take her home. After making her some hot milk, she begins to relax a little and tells me what happened. According to Mom, she went to the new house as planned. There were movers bustling about, and Violet was there. Violet, looking forward to living with you, she greeted with a smile. In response, Violet looked at her disapprovingly and even clicked her tongue. When Mom looked puzzled, Violet said, I can't live with her. She needs to leave. Why would I want to share my home with some stranger? But you agreed before. Look, I said yes just because of George. We've only been married 2 years. Can't you read the room? At that point, my blood boiled. I remembered Violet's strained expression. Regret filled my mind about not picking up on it then and not being with Mom today. So, where's George now? Mom shook her head at my question. According to Violet, George had gone on a sudden business trip and wasn't home. I couldn't take Violet's selfishness and George's irresponsibility anymore. I called George. After a few rings, George picked up. His voice was so bright. Hey Emma, what's up? Man, I had to go on this sudden trip just when we finished the renovations. Tough for you, huh? I'll make it up to you, promise. His upbeat tone made me uneasy, considering the situation. However, I was so angry that I couldn't help but blame George. George, what are you talking about? I told Violet I couldn't make it today because of work. I heard a small gasp from the other end. I told her to say sorry for me because of my sudden trip. Mom's been kicked out by Violet. She suddenly said she couldn't live with her anymore. What are you doing, George? George went silent for a moment. Is Mom okay? She's devastated. It's heartbreaking to see. I'm really sorry. I'll talk to Violet. With a subdued voice, George ended the call. I went to the bedroom where Mom was sitting on the bed, looking lost, a stark contrast to her cheerfulness this morning. I walked up to her and held her hand. Mom, let's continue to live together. Looking away from me, she hesitated. But, I stammered, don't worry about it. I want you here, and it looks like George was also in the dark. You've done nothing wrong. Hearing my reassurance, Mom finally gave a faint smile. The next evening, George called. Apparently, he had confronted Violet as soon as he got home, but initially, she kept denying everything. After persistently questioning her, she finally revealed her true feelings. It's not my fault. I thought we were going to live together way down the line, but then George said I was okay with it. In a twist of events, Violet let her emotions run wild and went off the rails. I love our life as it is, just the two of us. Isn't it better without Stella? We don't have to worry about anything. We can focus on having kids. I'm seething with anger at her selfishness and childish way of thinking. Sorry. What good does it do to apologize to me? I get it. I'll apologize to Mom once this is all sorted out. The phrase, once this is all sorted out, made me furrow my brows. George? I have something in mind, just give me some time. Seeing George appear to have made up his mind, I nodded in understanding. A few days later, my phone rang while I was relaxing on my day off. Violet's name flashed on the screen. Hello? As soon as I answered, Violet demanded to speak to Mom. Ignoring the audacity of her request, I simply responded, I can't do that. Look, I know you're mad. I regret what I did, okay? I was out of line. I want to apologize to Stella. I want to make amends, but it seems like Stella has blocked my calls. I couldn't help but snicker at Violet's justification. I think Mom has every reason to be hurt, you know. Violet's nose seemed to twitch as if she was about to cry. This just felt sketchy, to be honest. You were the one who kicked her out in the first place, Violet. Just because George mentioned divorce, you act on a whim. Upon hearing that, I knew about the divorce talk. Violet was utterly flustered. Why? Rather than backing down, she became infuriated. So, this was her true character. And here I thought she was a nice person. I thought she cared about George and Mom. That's why I'm apologizing. If Stella forgives me, this whole issue will be resolved. I couldn't help but laugh at how she sounded like she was admitting that she just wanted to avoid divorce. Why would you even think of doing such a thing? The house is in Mom's name. She even helped with the finances. Did you think you could just kick her out and live happily ever after with George? He initially wanted to live with Mom to honor her, you know? And you treat her like this? You were really short-sighted. Annoyed, Violet growled in response. Emma! I heard from behind me, turning to see Mom standing there. She gestured for me to hand her the phone. I looked at her with concern, but she gave me a reassuring smile. Hello, Violet. Stella! Finally, you picked up. You've reconsidered, haven't you? I'm really sorry. So you're coming back, right? All I needed was for you to care about George. That would have been enough. Stella, what are you saying? Just come back already. Mom sighed deeply. You really are self-centered. It's like dealing with a child. Stay out of my life from now on. You'll get what's coming to you for making my son sad. Without waiting for Violet's response, Mom handed the phone back to me. I could see relief wash over Mom's face, and I felt a bit more at ease myself. When Violet took the phone, her breathing had only gotten more erratic. You're making a fool out of me. I was utterly stunned by her enraged voice and couldn't help but sigh. Even if by some miracle you reconcile with Mom, George's feelings won't change, you know. What? You asked George to go on a business trip when you knew I couldn't help with the move, right? What are you talking about? George and we both know everything now. With that, I hung up the phone. Sure enough, a flurry of incoming calls followed, but I ignored them. It was almost over. I decided to peacefully await the end with Mom. Eventually, George's divorce was finalized. Violet assumed George initiated the divorce because she'd kicked Mom out of the house. But of course, George couldn't forgive that either. The real reasons for the divorce were Violet's attitude towards marriage and her affair. Worse, the other man was George's boss. I later found out their relationship had started when Violet was still working at George's company. Truly despicable. George had discovered the affair soon after they were married and even gathered evidence through a private investigator. If it were me, I would have left the moment I found out, but George seemed to genuinely love Violet. She barely did any housework or cooking. She was only interested in living lavishly and paid no attention to George. On top of that, she'd been having an affair with her husband's boss even before they were married. Still, George had hoped she would eventually realize her mistake and come back to him. Another big reason for moving in with Mom was that George wanted Violet to shape up as a housewife. He'd even hoped that by restricting her movements, she'd break off her affair. But Violet was oblivious to all of this. She took advantage of me not coming to isolate Mom by sending George away on a business trip. She thought she could do whatever she wanted then. Everything was for her own selfish lifestyle. Violet had completely underestimated George. When George found out all these facts, he said he felt whatever love was left in him vanish. Honestly, I think George is too gullible, and his thinking was shallow. But knowing his feelings for Violet, I couldn't say anything. George acted swiftly afterward. Armed with piles of evidence, he went to a lawyer and demanded compensation from Violet and her lover in the divorce settlement. Violet, who had neither savings nor a job, was now facing hellish days being sued for compensation not only by George, but also by her lover's wife. It seems she got dumped by her affair partner too. Now she's back at her parents' home. She's got to share the space with Violet's sibling and their spouse, so life must be uncomfortable. Making up for all the time she took off, no, probably working even harder than that, she's bound to have a tough time. George then apologized to Mom again. I had filled Mom in on George's situation to some extent, but he spoke about what happened in his own words. Mom listened in silence. "You did nothing wrong. You must have had a hard time," she said, shedding tears. George too bowed his head and cried. 2 years have passed, and George is now living with Mom in the renovated house. At first, it took a while for things to settle, but now she's back to her cheerful old self, smiling more and more each day. George says he's done with women and shakes his head, but he adds that if he ever gets another chance, he wants someone who's open, honest, and treats Mom well. To this, Mom chuckles. "Someone who cherishes you, that's what matters most," making George give a wry smile. I've been visiting more often, and the three of us share meals. Today is one of those days. But today, it's not just the three of us. I assure the nervous man walking beside me, it's okay. With a smile, will Mom and George be surprised? They must have had a clue when I said I had someone to introduce. Looking at the ring on my left hand, I smile. Seeing the familiar rooftop in the distance, I quicken my pace, holding his hand.
"Do you even know your place?"
Well, but I had to work late today.
"What's the point of a curfew then? Using work as an excuse?"
My husband yelled at me, as he usually did. The man who once rescued me from my loneliness through marriage. But years have passed, and that man is long gone. Still, I kept believing, hoping he'd someday return to the man he once was. Finally, I realized how wrong I was.
"Fine, have it your way. I can cut ties too, you know. I am not your slave."
My name is Penelope. I'm 30 years old. I met my husband Alexander 3 years ago. I was grieving the loss of my parents at the time. Invited by a coworker, I reluctantly agreed to go to a party. That's where I met Alexander, an IT professional. He too seemed less than thrilled to be there. I didn't go out of my way to strike up a conversation, but that night, maybe because of job stress, I drank more than usual. Feeling unwell, I stepped outside for some fresh air. Wow, I definitely drank too much. As I rested outside, a voice from behind asked,
"You okay?"
I turned to see Alexander. Sorry, I just needed some air.
"I can take you home if you're feeling sick."
Well, but...
"It's fine. Here, let me take your bag. I've already settled the bill."
Wait, then let me give you the money for...
"It's fine. Can you manage a taxi? If not, we can walk."
I was easily smitten back then. His kindness got to me, and before I knew it, I was in love. Days later, As thanks for the ride home, I invited him to dinner. From there, we grew closer and eventually became a couple. When I missed my deceased parents and shed tears, Alexander was always there. With his gentle smile, he'd say, "Your tears won't bring them back, Penelope." "I know that." "If you keep crying, your parents won't be at peace." "But..." "No matter what, I'll be by your side. You're not alone anymore, Penelope. So please, no more tears." "Alexander..." "I'll always be here, Penelope." How comforting those words were. Since then, I stopped crying over my parents. I looked forward to sharing many more moments with Alexander. As we headed to City Hall to register our marriage, I felt certain of this. We met at a reluctant party, yet that led me to Alexander. However, I was yet to discover his true colors, the true nature of my favorite Alexander. The first hint came about 6 months into our marriage. That's when Alexander suddenly said, "Hey, Penelope, could you cover a little more of the living expenses starting next month?" "What? Pay more? Did something happen?" "Well, you see, starting next month, my dad and mom asked if I could send them some money." "Hold on. Isn't Lucas a government worker? He has a stable income." "I don't fully understand it either, but it seems they're struggling financially. So I want to chip in a little for them from our living expenses. Is that okay?" When Alexander suddenly made this request, I was quite surprised. That's because his father, Lucas, has been working in the public sector for over 30 years. While his salary isn't exceptionally high, it's not so low that they would struggle. Are my in-laws really struggling so much that they would ask their son to contribute? Despite feeling uneasy, I couldn't flat out say no to Alexander's request. Reluctantly, I decided to pitch in an extra $500 for the living expenses next month. 2 months later, incredibly, Alexander made another shocking proposal. "Hey, Penelope, could you add another $500 starting next month?" Wait a minute. This time, even I had to call a timeout. That would mean I'm paying almost all our living expenses. So, is that a problem? I'm having a hard time financially because I'm sending money to my parents. I get that, but an extra $1,000 is too much. I want to save some money too. Save? You can save all you want in the future, but I can only support my parents now. Are you going to refuse that? I was struck dumb by Alexander's terrifying outburst. I had never seen the usually calm Alexander so furious before. Without showing me any mercy, Alexander fired off harsh words. Hey, are you even listening? Seriously, I've always thought this. Whenever something bothers you, Penelope, you go silent. Alexander, I married you, a woman who's not particularly outstanding. Why can't you even listen to your husband properly? No, that's not what I meant. Don't get into the details. All you need to do, Penelope, is listen to what I say. If you have time to argue, get the cleaning done instead. Alexander violently grabbed a can of beer and hurled it towards me. It hit my head hard, scattering the beer all over the floor. Pointing at the mess, Alexander yelled, Clean that up, you slowpoke! I couldn't say anything back, left with no choice but to do as told. From that day on, Alexander's behavior grew increasingly tyrannical. 2 years into our marriage, my days were filled with misery. After Alexander started henpecking me, several rules were imposed. The first rule was that I should shoulder all the household expenses. Second, I had to adjust my schedule to Alexander's. Third, I had to see Alexander off and welcome him home every day. Additional rules included doing the cleaning and laundry daily, preparing meals based on caloric count, and being home by 6 p.m. regardless of how busy work was. The rules were almost suffocating. I also work full-time, so it's impossible to devote all my time to Alexander. Still, I tread carefully, not wanting to upset Alexander. Some may wonder why I don't just get a divorce. Some people may think so, but I still believed Alexander would return to the kind man he once was. Then, one fateful day, after finishing dinner, I took a shower once I confirmed that Alexander was asleep. I had been instructed to shower only after he was asleep, so this had become my routine. Upon returning to the living room, I noticed an envelope sticking out of Alexander's bag. What's this? Normally, I would never touch Alexander's personal items, but that day my curiosity got the better of me, and I found myself reaching for the envelope. The front read, "Pay stub," with Alexander's name on it. On a whim, I pulled out the pay stub and checked the amount. The figure was unbelievable. $1.4K? The pay stub showed that Alexander's take-home pay was only $1.4K. With 22 workdays in a month, this amount didn't make sense. You're kidding, right? Alexander's salary is only $1,400 a month? That can't be true. Not when he's working in IT. I've been covering all the living expenses for a year and a half because he said he was supporting his parents. But was this the real reason? The next day, I decided to talk to Alexander directly about it. So I didn't prepare dinner and waited for him to come home. As soon as Alexander got home, I got right to the point. "Hey, Alexander, can we talk?" "What? Where's dinner? I told you to have it ready by the time I get home." "I need to talk to you about something important." "Something important?" "Is it true that you're working in IT, Alexander?" "What are you talking about?" "I saw your pay stub, Alexander. A take-home pay of $1,400 a month. Doesn't make sense for an IT job." Frustrated, Alexander let out a deep sigh. "Why are you snooping around my stuff, Penelope? That's creepy." "I'm sorry I snooped, but why lie?" "I didn't lie. You must have seen it wrong." "No, I saw it clearly. Your salary is, well, $1,400. "Ugh, I've had enough. I'm going out for dinner." With that, Alexander stormed out of the living room. The front door slammed shut, jolting me back to reality. What's going on? Why is he hiding his income? We're supposed to be partners in this. Something needs to be done. So I decided to call my in-laws and get to the bottom of it. "Hello?" Olivia, my mother-in-law, answered cheerfully. "Hi, Olivia. Sorry to bother you this late. Can I ask you something?" "What is it, Penelope?" Olivia didn't sound like she was struggling. She sounded as cheerful as always. Confused, I asked her directly. "Are you and Lucas having financial issues?" "What? Why would you ask that all of a sudden?" "I was just wondering, are you thinking of sending us money?" "No, it's just that..." "Don't worry. Lucas has a good job and we're doing fine. We have plenty saved up." "What about the money from Alexander?" "We've never received money from Alexander. He never even mentioned it, unlike you, Penelope." Alexander had supposedly been sending money to them for a year and a half. That's why I had been covering all the living expenses. But Olivia says they've never received anything. There's no reason for her to lie. Finally, it hit me. Alexander had been lying to me all along. But why? The next day, I took an afternoon off from work and headed to the private investigation agency I had researched beforehand. I requested a background check on Alexander. 2 weeks later, when I went to pick up the results after work, the investigator looked at me with a serious expression.
Penelope, I'm sorry to say that Alexander does not work for an IT company.
I figured. So, where does he work?
He is a janitor. Sure, he may clean for various companies, but he's definitely not an IT professional.
I see. My bad feeling had turned out to be true. Alexander had lied to me about where he was employed. I sighed deeply, and the investigator made a bitter face. What's wrong? I asked, and he began to speak slowly.
Well, Penelope, there's one more thing we need to talk about.
One more thing?
Yes. Actually,
what he told me was a devastating truth that I did not want to hear. I took the envelope with the investigation results and headed home, still in shock. It was 7 p.m. When I opened the front door, Alexander was waiting with an angry look on his face.
Do you even know what time it is?
I'm sorry, I had to work late today. It was clear Alexander was lying. Even though I was the one at an advantage here, I found myself apologizing out of habit. Seizing the opportunity, Alexander raised his voice.
Do you even know your place, Penelope?
Today was overtime, so it can't be helped.
What's the point of a curfew if you're gonna use work as an excuse?
An excuse? That's not what I meant.
What about my dinner? I'll divorce you if you neglect your duties.
In that moment, a dull pain ran across my cheek. Alexander had slapped me. And that was the last thread of patience I had snapped. Deception, control, insults, and now violence. How much more will it take for him to be satisfied? I'm not his slave. You can be happy with Alexander. That's what I thought when I got married 2 years ago. I had believed, up until now, that the man who once saved me from loneliness would eventually change. But the Alexander from back then was no more. Or perhaps he was never real to begin with. None of it mattered now. It's time to put an end to all of this. I took a deep breath, looked straight at Alexander and said, Fine, I'll leave.
What? Penelope, are you serious?
You're talking about divorce, right? I'll go, so you can do as you please.
Hey, what are you talking about? Divorce was a joke. I'm not going through with it.
Clearly, he hadn't expected me to agree to a divorce so easily. Alexander started to panic. Ignoring him, I continued. Joke or not, I'm serious. I'll pack my things, so don't get in my way.
Wait, I'm not agreeing to a divorce.
You don't have to. You'll eventually have no choice but to agree.
What does that even mean?
Cutting Alexander off, I held out the envelope I'd received from the private investigator. Inside were multiple photos proving Alexander's affair. His face drained of color as I placed the photos in front of him. It was time to deliver the cold, hard truth. These are pictures of you cheating, right? You lied about work, about sending money to your family, and you even had me covering our living expenses so you could support your mistress.
That's not it. Penelope,
What do you mean that's not it? I've already confirmed with Olivia, and these photos were taken by a professional investigator, you know. Alexander was clearly stumbling over his words. I was fed up with him. He was only thinking about saving his own skin. Time to put an end to this farce. I declared loudly. Who knew you'd turn out to be such a low life, Alexander? I was a fool for being deceived, but what you did is unforgivable. Lying, manipulating, cheating. You're the worst of the worst. How can you even live like that?
Please calm down, Penelope. I'm sorry.
Sorry? You expect me to forgive you now? All this time you've acted like a hand-picked husband while manipulating me like I'm some kind of maid.
I'm sorry. Can we start over?
Start over? Get real. You've got nowhere to run, Alexander. I'll make sure you hit rock bottom. Prepare yourself. My words must have hit home. He sank to his knees, groaning. Ignoring him, I packed my bags and left the house. I got a lawyer and divorced Alexander. I demanded $30,000 from him and $15,000 from his mistress, both as one-time payments. He tried to get financial help from Lucas, but was of course denied. It didn't end there. He got cut off from his in-laws' house after I told them the truth. His mistress dumped him too, and now Alexander had no one left to turn to. All that awaited him was a lonely, miserable life. But I had no sympathy for him. He got what was coming for looking down on people. As for me, I moved into my company's dormitory and started a new life. Commuting got easier, and it was comforting to have friendly colleagues in the same dorm. Though I now had a divorce record, I had zero regrets. What's more important is that I can live as myself. Being married isn't the only path to happiness. From now on, I'll live a life that I can be satisfied with. Just 1 year to live? What? Me?
Yes, I recommend starting treatment immediately.
You're kidding me! This was completely unexpected. My life had been smooth sailing with no health issues, and now a major obstacle had appeared. My relationship with my husband was rocky, and he had betrayed me time and again. Emotional stress was taking its toll, and tears began to flow uncontrollably. Was I going to face the end alone, without even the comfort of my husband beside me? Then, 6 months after accepting this harsh reality, a glimmer of hope appeared in my life of despair. My name is Sarah. I'm 28 years old. I'm a designer at an advertising agency and also juggle household chores as a working wife. I've been married to David for 2 years. He was a colleague from work, and we found out we had the same hobbies and began to communicate privately. After dating for a year, he proposed. I had always dreamed of building a family, so I happily accepted David's offer. I want to be your wife, David. I want to be with you forever.
Me too, Sarah. Let's make sure we find happiness together.
Absolutely. And so, with vows of love, we registered our marriage. But just 2 years in, our marital relationship is far from great. It all started about 6 months ago, when my sister suddenly visited our home. My sister Betty has always been the type who needs to be the center of attention. Since childhood, she was adored by our parents and relatives, which led her to become quite self-centered. This attitude continued into her middle school and high school years, where she'd throw tantrums and lash out whenever things didn't go her way. She's had a wild love life and has even had 2 abortions. Our parents couldn't stand it anymore, and together we had warned her. Listen, Betty, if you keep living like this, you're going to mess up big time. When I warned her like that, she scoffed back at me. Seriously? Annoying much? Are you trying to act like my big sister or something? I'm just worried about you, Betty. If something happens to you, it could be too late to do anything. Wow, hilarious. Really? Can you just stop? You're sticking your nose where it doesn't belong. She laughingly said cruel words as if they were nothing. This was too much even for our parents, who each spoke up.
Hey, Betty, what kind of attitude is that?
Exactly. Sarah really cares about you. What? I didn't ask for anyone's concern.
Betty, how can you say that?
If something happens to you, it'll be too late. Please, just take better care of yourself. Enough. It's my life. I don't need your directions, so shut up.
How dare you speak to your parents like that?
That's awful. Why would you say something like that? The argument continued, and Betty eventually stormed out of the house. She probably hopped from one guy's place to another. I never saw her again until after I had moved out and married David. Our reunion took place in the apartment where David and I lived. She showed up unannounced about a year after we got married. It's been a while, big sis. Betty, why are you here? Just let me in. It's raining outside. No way, David is here. What? I have nowhere else to go. Just let me stay for a bit. She forced her way in and made herself comfortable in the living room. David came out of the bathroom and was startled.
Who's this?
Sorry, David, this is Betty, my sister.
Your sister? The one who left home?
She showed up saying she has nowhere to go. Can we let her stay just for tonight?
Why just one night? She can stay as long as she needs to. It's cold out there, you know.
At that moment, I realized it. David was blushing and looking at Betty. As if in response, Betty also looked at him with a big smile. She grinned right back at him as if I didn't even exist. For the next month, Betty lived with us. She ate our food and used our stuff as if it was hers. She started asking me for money since she's jobless. When I refused, she went to David. Hey, David, can I borrow some money?
Here you go. Consider it your allowance.
Really? Are you sure?
Well, you're kind of like my sister too. Feel free to ask if you need anything.
Thank you. I love you, David. Right in front of me, Betty hugged David. She glanced at me with a smirk, as if she had won. I couldn't take it anymore. I rented a monthly apartment and essentially kicked Betty out. David blamed me, and Betty called me all kinds of names, but I couldn't care less. If I didn't do something, the worst could happen. I had to act before it was too late. My intuition was sounding an alarm. Deep down, I knew I had made the right choice. Although I managed to kick my sister out, my relationship with my husband worsened. Recently, we barely spoke to each other, and we had almost no quality time as a couple. Is this strained married life going to continue? That's when an unthinkable, cruel twist hit me. 1 year to live? Are you saying I only have a year?
Yes, I recommend starting treatment immediately.
You're kidding!
There are treatment options. It's best to consult with your family as soon as possible.
Okay. I went to the hospital because I was feeling off lately, and that's when they found advanced cancer. They said if I don't get treatment now, I have only a year to live. This can be real, right? I've always been healthy. How could this happen to me? I immediately called my husband to share this news. After multiple calls, he answered, clearly annoyed.
What is it?
Hey, you're done with work, right? We need to talk. Can you come home?
Nah, I can't. Working late today.
Again? Please, it's really important.
Quit nagging. I told you I can't. What's so important?
I've been diagnosed with cancer. They said I only have a year to live.
What? Only a year?
At this point, his tone changed, almost as if he was shocked by the 1 year part. Was he worried? That thought disappeared in an instant. He burst into laughter and said something unbelievable.
Come on, you're joking, right? How unlucky can you be to get a 1-year diagnosis?
What? David, why are you laughing? Do you know how I feel right now?
Well, it's just unfortunate, isn't it? Diagnosed with cancer before you're even 30. Must have done something bad in your past life.
What? Who am I talking to? Is this the man I fell in love with? The David who always told me he loved me? It felt like I was talking to a stranger. Someone entirely different from the man I once knew. Worse, he seemed to find humor in my life-threatening situation. A few hours later, my phone rang. It was a call from my sister Betty. "Hello," I said wearily. "Hey sis, I heard you've got cancer and only got a year to live?" "What? How do you know about this?" "Why, I was just eavesdropping while you were on the phone with David." "Why?" "I was listening right next to David when he talked to you on the phone, you know." "What? Why are you with David?" Deep down, I already knew the answer. But I couldn't bear to accept that my sister had taken my husband. Reality was far more brutal than I could have imagined. "Did you not realize it, sis? I've been dating David ever since you kicked me out of the house." "Since then? Really?" "Actually, even when we were living together, we've been together in the bedroom when you were not home." "Stop it! That's too much! How could you?" "This is hilarious. I've always wanted to get back at you. I was super annoyed when you and our parents lectured me." "And you think that justifies this?" "Hey, it's not my fault, okay? If someone cheats, it's the fault of the one who gets cheated on. Same goes for getting sick." I hung up the phone immediately, my breaths growing heavy. I couldn't continue talking to her. I would lose it. I quickly opened my husband's laptop to look for evidence of his affair. And there it was. Conversation and pictures with my sister, without even the slightest effort to hide it.
"Let's get married soon. We'll manage the divorce."
They planned, as if I was just an obstacle. And that was the moment. The love I had been desperately clinging to toward my husband vanished. What had I been so afraid of? There's no happiness in living with a man who would so easily trample on someone's feelings. My priority now isn't dealing with them. I need to focus on my treatment. Revenge can come later. However, since we found evidence of cheating, there is no reason not to divorce. I transferred evidence from my husband's computer to my phone and visited a law firm the next day. I initiated divorce proceedings and a compensation claim and started treatments in the hospital. When I brought up the divorce, my husband coldly responded,
"Divorce? Perfect. I've wanted to split up anyway."
"To marry my sister Betty?"
"Of course. Plus a wife with a terminal illness has no value. A shame. I can cash in on the insurance, but oh well."
Unbelievable. So this is what you thought of me. Choosing divorce was the right call. So I finalized the divorce, claiming compensation from both my husband and my sister. David paid Betty's share and our relationship ended. For the next year after the divorce, I focused on my treatment and underwent surgery when the tumor shrank. Thankfully, it was successfully removed, and while not entirely cured, I had recovered enough to return to my old life. If the cancer doesn't recur for 5 years, the survival rate dramatically increases. That day, I went to the hospital for my regular checkup.
"Is that you, Sarah?"
A voice called out from behind me. I turned around to find David, my ex-husband, standing there. "Long time no see. What brings you here?"
"I've been trying to reach you. Why aren't you answering my calls?"
"Why would I? I deleted your contact a long time ago."
"Well, never mind that. You don't have much time left, right?"
"What are you talking about?
Your time's running out, Sarah. My new wife Betty is sick too. I need you to be a donor for her.
I was stunned. What on earth was he talking about? Why would I have to be Betty's donor? Why should I give up my life for you two after I've finally gotten my life back on track? I was boiling inside, my body shaking, but I tried to keep my composure. Is it true that Betty is sick?
Yes, she's been diagnosed as terminally ill. They won't tell us much, but there's something wrong with her organs. It's some kind of tumor.
A tumor?
Yes, it's like a hard lump. She needs a donor because of the problem with her organs. A random donor could cause rejection, so you're the best candidate.
Why should it be me?
Are you kidding? You don't have much time left, Sarah. I've even compensated you, so at least do something useful for us.
He looked distressed, his voice raised in anger. I couldn't help but burst into laughter. You really have no idea, do you?
What are you talking about?
My cancer is almost completely cured.
He looked stunned.
Of course he would be. When we divorced, I was given only 1 year to live. I'm planning to live my life from now on. I'm not in a condition to become anyone's donor.
Wait, Betty is your sister and she's dying. Are you saying you won't do anything?
Why should I sacrifice my body for the two people who betrayed me?
What?
He glared at me, as if ready to grab me any second. I thought it was the right moment to drop a bombshell. Since you seem clueless, let me tell you. Betty's current situation is entirely due to her past actions.
What are you talking about? What did Betty do?
You really have no idea. She's been involved with dozens of men and has had multiple abortions because of it. That's why she got sick and had to go to the hospital multiple times.
Wait, are you talking about STDs?
I took her to the hospital back then, but I assume you ignored her health issues afterward. That's probably why she's in this situation now. So, unfortunate for you both.
Betty was that kind of lowlife? Really?
You might see her as your cute sister-in-law and the woman you remarried, but she's always been that way. I bet she's still seeing other men behind your back. He visibly broke down, grabbing his head and collapsing on the spot. In a quiet voice, he muttered,
"Help me."
I showed no mercy. Help me? You have the nerve to ask that of me? Have you forgotten what you've done? You cheated on me, betrayed me, and abandoned your wife after her terminal diagnosis. Do you understand how cruel that is?
I'm sorry. I apologize. Please forgive me.
Forgive you? No way. Both you and Betty are responsible for your actions. You both look down on people and only care about your own desires. That's why this is happening. I won't help either of you. Serves you right. I turned away from his tearful face and left the hospital. Finally, I had my revenge. Later, I heard Betty lost all sensation in her limbs and now was bedridden, unable to move freely. Failing to find a doctor, she's going through cycles of hospital stays and the prognosis is grim. David had to switch to part-time work to take care of Betty, and recently, his unexcused absences have been piling up. He's losing face at work, and I hear his job is on the line. Having paid me the settlement, he's broke and working multiple part-time jobs at night. He's also falling apart. Karma's a bitch. He got what he deserved. As for me, I recently returned to the job I had taken leave from for my treatment. I now rent a slightly upscale apartment near work and enjoy a good life. When I was diagnosed as terminally ill and discovered the affair, I had given up on life completely. But facing those challenges head-on has shaped who I am today. I'll continue to believe in myself and strive earnestly for a better life.